Today we're going to start out and we're going to talk a little bit about compression. And I figure I didn't really give that a thorough shake the other day, so I just want to go over compression a little bit with you guys. And then we're going to jump right into this mix. And I sent you guys a track. Hopefully you were able to download it because it'd be nice if you could follow along a little bit and learn some of these techniques that I'm going to be using. The last time I started on that other track, it was you guys didn't have the session, and I figured, well, you're never going to remember that if you don't have a session in front of you. So let's see if we can get through this. Still got a few people coming in. Get through this compression section, and then we'll jump right into the mix. Compressors were originally invented for the radio broadcast industry. And in order to broadcast a radio signal, you have to start with a high-frequency carrier signal. So this carrier signal is just an ultra-high-frequency sine wave. It's blended along with your source signal, and it makes this radio signal. The encoded signal is then broadcast to our radios, and the radios remove that carrier signal. Then we can hear the program material that we want to hear. If the level of the audio was broadcast too loud, it would actually distort this carrier signal. It would either distort the radio broadcast or it would actually fail. And this failure or distortion is called overmodulation. So we had hit a wall on how much level we could transmit on the radio because the engineers were afraid that they would be overmodulating the signal. And so compressors were invented to keep this from happening. And in 1937, Bell Labs developed the first commercial compressor called the Western Electric 110 limiting amplifier. And it was actually just a radio station power amplifier, but it contained a compression circuit so the user could broadcast much louder signals without the fear of distortion. It worked by monitoring the signal that was coming in, and as it became close to the level that would cause distortion, the compressor would bring down the level automatically. By doing this, the engineer could bring up the overall level without fear of corruption. And so that's how we got our first compressors. You can think of a compressor as basically a automated volume ride. You know, it's doing the volume rides for you. So compressors were also used for cutting vinyl records to keep the level within a specified range so the needle didn't skip. And as time progressed, more compressors were developed and engineers started using them in recording studios. And they helped the engineer control the recording level without having to constantly adjust the mic level or ride the fader. They could record louder and protect their recordings from accidentally distorting the tape. And this meant less noise. That's signal-to-noise ratio, how much noise you have compared to signal. And it also had a really cool side effect of making the music sound louder and punchier. It made the recordings sound much bigger, and it helped the mixes translate to different systems by containing the transients. So there's basically these 6 parameters on all compressors. Whether you can actually adjust them or not depends on the type of compressor. But we have a threshold, we have a ratio, an attack, a release, knee, and makeup gain. And so threshold of a compressor is a set amplitude limit that dictates when the compressor will engage or disengage. As the input exceeds the threshold, the compressor kicks in with its given attack time. And as the input drops back down below the threshold, the compressor disengages according to its release time. So ratio determines how much gain reduction the compressor applies when the signal passes a threshold level. And it's done in these ratios of 2-to-1 or 4-to-1 or 6-to-1. And for example, a ratio of 4-to-1 means that for every 4 dB, the signal rises above the threshold, the compressor will increase the output by 1 dB. So it's cutting off 3 dB, basically. A 4-to-1 ratio is cutting off those 3 dB for every 4 dB that goes through. So we can take a look at it, and you can see it a little easier here. This is your output level over here, and this is your input level. So until you reach this threshold point, then it's just straight input to output. Once you reach a certain point that you set with the threshold knob, then it starts compressing. And this first one, 1-to-1 compression, means no compression. That means the input equals the output. And as we keep going, 2-to-1, for every 2 dB of input signal above the threshold, the compressor will output 1 dB. So if we look over here at this other chart, you can see that we have a threshold here, and the signal is actually going 8 dB above the threshold. So anything until that threshold is normal. Anything that crosses that threshold is getting truncated. And this is the, for a 2-to-1 compression ratio, an 8 dB over the threshold signal will only allow 4 dB over the threshold to come out. And a 4-to-1 for an 8 dB signal over the threshold, then it's only going to allow 2 dB to come out. And then we have a 10-to-1 ratio. And then anything basically above 10 or 20-to-1 is considered limiting. And limiting just means that it's a flat line. The signal will not go across that flat line, that flat limiting line here. How do you know what ratio to use? It's kind of a matter of hunt and peck a little bit. I can give you some examples. Bass guitars are good at like 4-to-1 ratio. Drums can be good at 2-to-1 ratio, but you can also use much higher ratios with drums. Vocals, for a smooth vocal, is good at 2-to-1. Electric guitar is anywhere from 2-to-1 to 6-to-1. The attack time is the amount of time it takes for the compressor to engage or to react to the signal once the input amplitude surpasses the threshold. So that's how quickly it grabs that signal that goes above the compression threshold. The release time is the amount of time it takes for the compressor to disengage or stop attenuating the signal. So once the input drops below the threshold, it's how long it takes for it to go back to normal. That's the release time. So we can take a look at it and see it here a little better. So slowing down the attack time allows you to get more energy through. So here's a slow attack here. And what that means is the transient pokes through before this compressor starts compressing. It can make the instrument sound very powerful. It's going to make the drums very punchy. It's going to give the guitar a lot of attack. It's going to let that transient through, which is the kind of signal that we need for impact. But on the other hand, if the instrument isn't played very consistently, a slow attack can emphasize problems with a performance. So if you have a bass player and he's hitting his notes all different levels all over the place, and he's got a picky type of sound, maybe he's playing with a pick or something like that, then if you have a slow attack time, it's really going to make him sound uneven and unnatural. So for that type of situation, you would use a fast attack time, and you would try to clamp down on those uneven parts of the signal. You know, if you use this fast attack time, you have to use it in moderation. If you use too much compression with a fast attack, then it'll just suck the life out of the whole performance, and it will be very dull, and it will place it further back in the mix. And we're going to talk about the depth of your mix a little bit later. But by cutting off that transient, it makes something sound further away. The same way as if you turn off high end on a signal, it can also make it sound very far away. So it's a trade-off how much you want to use if you're going to use a fast attack. You have to be very careful with a fast attack. The most natural sound is a slow attack and a fast release. So a fast release gives you energy and makes the compressor sound aggressive. But be careful, because if you release too quickly, the compressor can have a pumping sound that sounds unnatural. A slower release can have a smoothing sound, but if you overdo it, it can also suck the life out of the track. Because what happens is the compressor doesn't recover before the next transient hits. And so it just keeps the signal down, and it just kind of buries the whole mix. So how do we set these things? This is a good kind of practice to learn how to hear compression. And compression takes a long time to hear. It takes a long time to learn. A lot of engineers still don't hear it very well, and it took me years to figure it out. But I have a video I'm going to play in just a minute that'll help. But in order to hear and to set the attack time, you have to learn how to hear the attack. And so you should start with a compressor using a slow attack and like a medium release to a fast release. And so you can hear the transient coming through. And then you listen to the attack of the instrument while you make the attack faster, and listen and see what it does as you speed it up. So as you speed up that attack, you're chopping off more and more and more of that transient, and you're changing the sound of the drums. You have to think about what you want your compressor to do whenever you use compression. You can't just throw it on there randomly, or you'll get random results. So if you want your instrument, your source instrument, to have more attack, then you're going to use a slower attack on the compressor. If you want to get rid of some of the attack, then you're going to use a faster attack on the compressor. And release time is a similar type of thing. So to learn to hear the compression release, you start with the compressor using a fast attack and a fast release. And you just listen to the track. And for more aggressive types of sound, you want to use a fast release. That just grabs it and then lets go immediately. And if you want to smooth things out, you're going to use a longer release. Slowly make the release longer and listen to how it smooths your track. Be careful not to let your release go too long. And it needs to release before the next major impact on your track. So that's what I was saying before. You have to have the compressor back to normal before you have the next hit. So if you're doing a snare drum and you have a hit on 2, you want that compressor to recover before it gets to that next hit on 4. And it takes time to learn to hear compression, so be patient, but play around with it. You know, you've got that compressor in your plug-in bundle, and it does enough so you can learn to hear what compression sounds like. Next is the knee. And the knee is just this point here where the compressor kicks in at the threshold. And you can see by the diagram basically what it's doing. So the knee of a compressor refers to the transition point around the compressor's threshold where the output becomes attenuated versus the input. A hard knee offers a more distinct triggering of the compressor, so it's just going to jump in there and grab it instantly. And a softer knee, it starts grabbing that source before it even hits the threshold. You can see this arc here, and it's already starting to grab down here, and it's a much smoother transition. So if you don't want to hear your compressor so much, you're going to use a softer knee. If you want to hear it hitting hard, like for maybe drums or something like that, you'll use a harder knee. And then we have makeup gain. And this is just what I was talking about when I showed you guys the EQ the other day. And when we added EQ, it boosted the signal and we had to turn down the output volume, right? So our input and output were the same. This is the same thing in reverse for makeup gain. So the makeup gain of a compressor is the gain applied to the signal after the compression takes place. Makeup gain is typically used to bring the peaks of a compressed signal up to the same level as the peaks of the pre-compressed. And that way it feels like it's the same level. So you're going to look at your peak level of your input of your compressor and your peak level of your output of your compressor, and you're going to put those at the same spot, and that's what makeup gain does. And so I thought I'd go over a few different types of compressors. There's these four are really the main types of compressors. There are other compressors now. There's hybrid compressors, and there's a bunch of different compressors, but these were the original four, and I thought I would go through these first. I'm not going to get into how these work technically because it just doesn't matter. You just need to know what a tube sounds like, what an optical sounds like, what a FET sounds like, and what a VCA sounds like. So tube compressors were the first compressors, and they're the ones that were used in radio stations and vinyl cutting labs to make records. And this is the most famous compressor. This is this Fairchild 670. And this was originally made for cutting records. And then this is a modern compressor, the Manley Varimu. And this is a plug-in of a really nice tube compressor also. So the characteristics of a tube compressor is they have a very fine and subtle type of compression. And they're good for a final mix and adding sheen. They add a lot of color or tone, but the compression is pretty transparent, so they have a real sound to them. The tube gives it this nice, fat, big sound. And they're clean sounding, and they add smoothness to a mix, and they have a soft knee. They're relatively slow on the attack and the release, and they have slight harmonic distortion or saturation, which adds color or warmth to the sound. And the ratio on these works a little different. It is program-dependent ratio. So that means that the louder the signal comes in, it kicks up the ratio higher and higher. If it's just barely crossing the threshold, then it's going to have a very low ratio. And if you cross the threshold by a big amount, it will use a higher ratio. So it's constantly working in these boundaries. And they're really good for going across an entire mix or for vocals, anything that you want to have a very subtle type of compression. Because the attack is slow, and so it'll let the words come through of a vocal, and then it'll compress it after the initial attack of the vocal. Next, we have optical compressors. And optical compressors use light-sensitive circuits that control the compression amount. They react more slowly than other compression types. This can be desirable sometimes. The most famous one, I guess, is this LA2A here. And this is considered the vocal compressor. Most producers swear by it. And it also is good for, you can add some sustain to a bass with this. And sometimes people put it across the mix bus. And then this TubeTech CL1B is also a very nice optical compressor. And the LA3A is kind of a more modern version of this LA2A. I believe that this is solid state, and this one probably has tubes in it. So this compressor is considered a very slow compressor. You can hit it really hard without it distorting. You can get 10, 15 dB of compression sometimes, especially on this LA3A down here. And it adds some saturation and color. It's kind of a dirty sounding compressor. It's not clean and pristine. And it's good for vocals and bass guitar, and several things. I've put it on horns before. If you have a solo horn and you want to smooth out the horn, that's a nice compressor to use. It's not going to be in your face, and it's not going to be aggressive sounding. And then the next are the FET compressors, and this is probably my favorite compressor ever. This is a very fast compressor, and they use transistors to emulate the sound of tubes, but with a lot more reliability, and they have a higher signal-to-noise ratio. So they're popular for vocals, and they're amazing for drums. This is my favorite drum compressor. Because it has such a fast attack and fast release that you can really fine-tune the transients. It's a dirty-sounding compressor. It really changes the sound of the instrument. and it adds a lot of saturation, and it's got transformers inside it that add this saturation. It's nonlinear compression, and it adds character and harmonic distortion. It requires low-level inputs, and it requires more output gain, which normally causes more noise. They're good for drums, acoustic guitars, piano. And for example, on a piano or an acoustic guitar, you can set a faster attack of this and de-emphasize the attack. Sometimes when you have a strumming acoustic guitar, then you want to get rid of some of that picky type of sound. And then the last one is VCA compressors. And this is voltage control amplifier is what it means, and it uses an integrated circuit to give a very precise control. They don't have so much color, and they don't have many side effects, like they don't distort. And it makes them ideal for some tasks, like if you have a clean mix, you can put these across your mix bus. So these three compressors, the Neve 33609, the API 2500, and this SSL G comp, are all bus compressors for a console, basically. These are designed to be master bus compressors. And this DBX 160 is kind of a utilitarian VCA compressor. They're very clean. They have a transparent sound, very low distortion. It's similar to a FET, but without the distortion. They can add energy to a mix. They have a flexible threshold, ratio, attack, release, and sometimes even a knee parameter. And they're very capable of fast attack and release times. And they have high levels of gain reduction. So you can hit these pretty hard too without them sounding bad. And typically they're less expensive than the tube versions of compressors. But they also don't have quite the high-end clarity. And they're good for mix bus and mastering. So there's a couple of other types of compressors I just wanted to throw in there. There's the multi-band compressor, which is actually several compressors that are designed to work at different frequency ranges independently. So if you take a look at this Waves compressor here, this is the C4, you'll see that it has these sliders that divide the compressor into 4 different sections. And these are called crossover points. And so you can slide these around, and you can compress your low end different than your low mids, different than your high mids, and different than your highs. And they're completely adjustable, and you can change the amount that it's compressing, and they're very, very useful. I use them all the time. And the next type is this dynamic EQ here. And a dynamic EQ is an EQ that can compress an individual frequency. So with a dynamic EQ, usually you have a choice of whether to use it as an EQ or whether to add dynamics to it. If you use it as just an EQ, you're just dipping a certain frequency. If you use it as a dynamic EQ, the dip only happens when it passes a certain threshold. So it's like a frequency-specific compressor. So what do we use compression for? Maintaining a more constant level across the entirety of the audio signal or track. So that's from beginning to end. We want it more consistent. It prevents overloading and clipping. Side chaining elements together. So side chaining is when you take a source that you're going to compress and you trigger that compression by a different source. So let's say you were doing a dance track and you wanted to compress the bass so that the kick drum came through more. You could use a side chain, which is just a send from the kick drum track. You would set up a little aux send, and you would send that aux send into your bass compressor. And every time the kick drum would hit, the bass would clamp down for just a short amount of time, and then it would come back up. And by doing this, you can hear the kick drum more clearly, and you can keep that low-end energy that you need for dance music. Compressors can enhance sustain, And they do this by using a fast attack and a slow release. So it clamps down on that initial signal and then it slowly releases. So this is what guitar players use when they use compression. They clamp down on the signal, they turn the whole thing up and they clamp down on the beginning, and then as it slowly releases, it's actually, the guitar doesn't die out as much because you're adding that sustain. And if you use a slow attack, then you're enhancing the transients because you're clamping down on anything that happens after the transient. So that, in essence, is bringing that transient up. They can add movement to a signal, which is kind of a pumping sound that you hear on some music. And they can add depth to a mix. And the way you do that is you tailor your transients in order to push certain instruments back further in the mix. So if you had a very bright conga, and you wanted that conga to sit back further in a mix, then you could use this type of thing. And you're chopping off the transient, and that chopping off of the transient makes it appear further away. Imagine standing next to a snare drum and then standing across a concert hall from a snare drum. The snare drum close to you, you're going to hear the transient more. The snare drum far away, you're not going to hear as much transient. You're also not going to hear as much high end. And both of those things you can use to your advantage when you're mixing to add an artificial depth to your mix. They're also good for uncovering nuanced information in an audio signal. This is like if you have a snare drum, a drummer playing, and he's playing ghost notes. So maybe he's got his backbeats, and then he has a bunch of little tiny notes in between. Those ghost notes you can bring up by clamping down on the backbeat, right? And by clamping down on that backbeat, you're in essence bringing up all those other ghost notes. It's also used for de-essing. We talked about side chaining from another source, but there's another type of side chaining. And what you can do is, if you wanted to bring down the S's of a voice, if you have a singer that's got a lot of S's and a lot of sibilance going on, you can set the compressor so that it's only compressing, it's only being triggered by high frequencies. And you do that by putting a high-pass filter before the compressor sidechain. So you're not actually changing the audio signal at all. You're changing what the compressor is reacting to. And that's how a de-esser works. The de-esser, you filter out all of the low-end information, and you only leave that high-end information as the trigger for the compressor. And so whenever there's an S or a bright sound, it will compress. And they're also used on the master bus for gluing a mix together and making it more cohesive. So I've got this great channel that I found on YouTube, and this guy, he's a compression designer, and it's called Kush Compression, I think is the name of the company. And he designs all these amazing products, and I wanted to share this video with you. It's a little bit long, but it's really, really good, and it shows you what I'm talking about learning how to hear compression. So let's watch this real quick. So I highly recommend his channel. He has a lot of different subjects. He's very good at explaining. And he's really tuned into how his processors work. I've really enjoyed this. I have people ask me a lot about how to hear compression. And I generally direct them to this video because this he explains it very, very well. So next we're going to move into our little mix session. So if you guys want to open up your Pro Tools sessions, if you have downloaded them, we're going to just go straight down this list that I've sent you in the email, this Approaching a Mix list. And we're going to talk about different ways to get through this kind of stumbling block of mixing a song. So the first step, obviously, is just to import the audio, which I've gone ahead and done for you guys. And then the next step is going to be to check your I/O preferences and set them properly. So let's go in and check our I/O as I've shown you how to do in the past. I/O, here's my bus, and I'm going to select default all buses.
Professor, I just have a quick question.
Sure.
When I went to open up the session,
Yeah.
I got a dialog box that came up saying session notes, and it said some bus paths could not be mapped to their previous output paths, and then it gave me a list of about 15
That's fine.
buses. That's okay?
Yeah, just okay that.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
And that's what we're doing right now by going in and cleaning up our I/O here. We're correcting any kind of bus confusion that it's had.
Right.
Okay, so I've opened up my I/O setup now, and I've clicked on default. I'm going to do my same trick that I always do, where I get rid of these stereo mono buses. I'm going to delete them. New path, 12 mono buses. And then I'll go down and click at the bottom, and I'll say new path again. I'm going to do 12 stereo buses, and I'll name those S for stereo. And so now we've cleaned up our, just make sure one thing here. Mix is going, yeah, I've got my funky Zoom set up here, so I have to make sure all my stuff is, I'm unable to open it because it says it was created in an older version of Pro Tools. What? That's crazy. You should be able to open any old version. Wow. Wow, I don't know what that is, Nicholas. That's very strange. Can't open it because it was created with an older version of Pro Tools. Are you on a PC or are you on a Mac? On a Windows laptop. Interesting. Yeah, that's very, very strange. Let me see what I can do here to help you out. You were able to download the audio files, right? Okay, let's see if I can save session as. There's no options there. Maybe I can export it as something else. Save session copy in. Oh, AIFF. I think it should be WAV. 48K, 32-bit. Enforce Mac PC compatibility, but it's not able to check. Session is the latest version. Yeah, you should be able to open any version. I can open up I opened up sessions the other day that were like old Pro Tools from 15, 20 years ago, and the session opened up fine. There's no parameters to make it work. Very strange. Okay, try one other thing, Nicholas. If you go to, if you go and you make a new Pro Tools session, right? So just click New Session, and you know what? I'll just kind of do this with you here. Let me close this out for a second. If you go and you make a new session, just put this here, wave, and like that, and I'm going to store this on my desktop for right now. So I have a new session that's just blank like this. You can go ahead and change your tempo to 68 because you'll need that. Okay. And then what I want you to do is go to Import Session Data. And then you're going to find that session that I sent you. Somebody's microphone is on. Oh, it's Daniel. It's your. Thanks. And then find my session, and double click on it. So here's the session here. Import session data from. Right, and then click on Open, and you'll get this dialog box. And this is kind of a cool thing to know. So the rest of you guys, this is a very nice thing to know. This is how you can have different songs and then share tracks between different songs. So what this window does is it allows you to bring in tracks from other sessions. So say I was working on a song and I liked something from the bass track that I was working on earlier. And I wanted to go, and it's much better than what I've done now. And so I'm going to go back and find my old bass. Well, you can use this import session data box to find your bass track. There's no bass on this song, by the way. It's a keyboard bass. So you could find it. I'm going to deselect all these. And you can import this track back in and bring this old session version of the bass back into your new session. And there's a couple of different things that you can do to it. All of these dialog boxes. Okay, Nicholas, we'll try this. Try to make a new session and then try importing session data and see if that works. Or have you tried that? You can just add them to the new session, absolutely, because we're starting from scratch here. So just drag all those audio files into the new session if you can get them to come in. Because I haven't done anything to this session yet. Their wave, perfect. Tempo 68, that's just a starting tempo. Okay, so we don't need to do this session import. But this is a very cool window to know about. And the things to be aware of is when you do this, you can either link your audio files to what's already in your folder, or you can make a new copy of the audio files. That's an important thing up here. And you can tell the computer what you want to import. So you can either import everything, which means the volume and the pan and the plugins and the audio files and all the clip regions and all that kind of stuff. Or you can come down here and there's a giant list of stuff. And you can just import certain things. So if I had a bass track and I had done a bunch of volume automation on that bass track, and I wanted to import just the volume information, I could turn off all these things and I can just select volume automation. And when I import this, so if this was the bass track, I would find the same track here on the destination. There's no tracks right now, but there would be something named exactly the same. And I would just transfer that volume information into my new session. And you can also import different things like your tempo map or your key signature markers and all that kind of stuff. So that's what this window is for, and it's a really crucial, useful part of working in Pro Tools. Alrighty, so let me know if you're doing any better over there, Nicholas. I'd really like for you to be able to follow along if you like. Okay, so let's just go straight down our list here. We have import all audio, which I've already done for you guys. And we've done our I.O. setup where we fixed all of that. Next is to organize and rename the tracks. So all of these long names here are just not useful in Pro Tools, and you don't need them there. So I'm just going to go through and quickly rename. And the shortcut command to get to the next track. So you rename one, and then you can either click on the little next button here and go to the next track so you don't have to close this dialog box. Or you can hold down Command Shift, and then you can just use the arrows and you can scroll back and forth between the different tracks. So snare top. Alrighty. So now I can see very clearly and easily what my tracks are, as opposed to reading all those little tiny letters that are all chopped off. And then we'll organize them, and I pretty much have organized them already for you guys. So this is a proper order. You usually have the drums first, and then you have this is a drum reverb. This is a chamber that they had printed down here. Then we have bass, and next are usually guitars, and then we usually have keys and then vocals. And so I've kept everything in that kind of order. And so next we'll quickly color code here. So I'm going to select all the drums. I'm holding down the shift key, and I'm selecting the first one, hold down the shift key and select the last one. And then I'm going to make these a little bigger so I can get to the little color bar there. I'm going to double click on this and open up my color palette, and I'll choose blue. So check it out. What happened here? My regions didn't change colors. And that was from day one we talked about that. So that's a preference. So let's go and let's fix that. And we want to go to display. And we're going to select track color and tracks and MIDI channels. The MIDI note color shows velocity, should always be on. And let's hit OK. And now my tracks and the regions are going to be the same color. Here's my reverb. I'll pick a different color for that. Here's my bass. And then I have two guitars. I'll select both guitars. And then an organ. And then I have vocals. I don't like that color. So this track is in volume automation. So you're viewing the bottom. The track view is called volume automation. So you just switch that back to waveform there. So they all look consistent. So this was a live performance that this group did for a little internet broadcast. And so there is no click track to it. So we can't just set one tempo and expect it to work. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to make my tempo map, but I'm going to do it manually. And we've talked about this a little bit before. The first thing you need to do is make sure that you have this tab to transients selected right here. Make sure that's on. And then I'm going to play a little bit of this, but actually before I play it, I'm going to go ahead. I haven't gotten to it on my list yet, but I'm going to make a master volume fader. Command Shift N for a new track. And I'm going to do stereo. And I'm going to do a master fader. And I'm just going to do this because I don't know what this mix is going to sound like, and it could be really loud. So I'm just going to turn it down a bunch of dB, just so we can monitor it enough to do our little tempo map. And so I've muted the chamber here because it's very loud. And we'll just listen to a little bit in the non-mixed state. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to this first kick drum here. And the way I'm going to get to it is I'm going to hit the tab key. Right? And so now my kick drum is at that first transient there.
So sorry.
Yeah.
I'm just a little behind and trying to keep up.
Oh, okay. I'll slow down just a little bit.
All right, here we go.
There you go. Much better.
Sorry. When you changed preferences for the track colors to change the colors of the regions, can you show that one more time?
Absolutely. Just stop me anytime. I've got a lot to go through, and so I'm kind of rushing a little bit. I'm sorry. Just stop me whenever you have any questions. So you're going to go to the preferences, and then you're going to go to display, and you're going to select, first of all, MIDI note shows velocity, and that should always be checked. And then these are what you want. The default color coding should be tracks and MIDI channels.
Okay.
And the default clip color should be track color.
Got it.
Okay. And that'll make your colors nice.
Thank you.
Do you want me to pause for a second and let you catch up a little bit? You don't have to rename the tracks if you don't want to right now. You can do
Oh, no,
that
I
now.
did that.
Oh, okay.
That's
Great.
I'm good.
All right, great. So I'm going to go to this first kick drum hit here, and I'm going to use my tab to transient, and I'm going to tab to that first hit. You can see my little arrow here is right there. And I'm going to just make this kind of random. The first measure of my tempo before this kick drum hit is not going to be accurate, but I want to choose a number here. So my counter right now is at 10 to 445, but I'm going to just randomly make that measure 10, right? So I'm going to hit Command I, and it brings up our little dialog that allows us to make our beat markers. And I'm going to just type in 10 and hit OK. So that's my first downbeat of the song. So it screwed up my tempo over here, but we're not really worried about that. The main reason that I'm doing these tempo this tempo changes is so my delays stay in time, because my delays will be locked to the MIDI clock. And so I want those to stay in time. And so I'm just going to listen a little bit now that I have my first little marker there, and that's on measure 10. Okay, there's my next one. So I'm just going to mark off every measure, and you can do this pretty quickly once you kind of get the keystrokes down. So I've tabbed to transient, and I'm on that next measure, kick drum downbeat. I'm going to hit Command I, and I'm going to type in 11. Enter. Listen a little bit more. Okay, there's another one. And I'm going to hit Command I, sorry. And this is measure 12. Hit OK. So you can see my tempos are changing slightly because they didn't play to a click track. These guys are just playing live, and they'll change quite a bit throughout the song, although the drummer has very good time. And what I'm going to do also is my song doesn't have a click track in it, so I'm going to make a click track. And you make click track by going up to the track bar here and all the way down to create click track. And I'll put that up at the very top here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn it on by clicking on this little metronome button here. Or you can just use numeric keypad 7, toggles it on and off. So let's just listen to those first 3 bars with the click and see how close we are. That'll start drifting. Right, so we have to do it basically for every measure, and sometimes you have to do it even twice a measure. But right now we're just going to do it once every measure, just so we have our delays in time with our music. So I'm tabbing ahead. I'm going to hit Command I again, and this is measure 13. I type in 13. You see there's all these little numbers here at the end, these extra ticks, and if you just type in 13 and hit enter, it'll get rid of those for you. So. So I can, now that I've kind of got the hang of what's going on here, I can basically do this visually. I can see that there's a kick there, and then there's another kick on 3. Look, there's the next one. So I'm going to tab over to that. So I'm going to go back, and I had finished on measure 13. I'm going to just, now I can kind of see visually. I'm going to turn off, we should be in slip mode, not grid. And I'm just going to see, I'll put the cursor kind of right before this next kick drum hit, and I'll tab over. I'll identify, and this will be 14. And I can just kind of quickly go through and do this visually. There's another one. Command I, 15, enter. There's another one. I'm just looking ahead at, because the kick drums are pretty consistent on this song. And I'll tab to this next kick drum where I think the downbeat is. If you're unsure, just listen to the track. And as you're doing this, if you get any weird tempos that aren't like 66 or 67, or if they jumps to 32, that means that you're in the wrong, you've clicked on the wrong measure, or you've typed in the wrong measure. Let's keep going. Identify beat, 20. Let me listen here. Everybody able to follow along? You don't have to be as speedy as me, or you might be speedier, but as long as everybody understands the technique. Oh, beautiful maiden. So we have a measure here without a downbeat. So what I can do is I can do a couple of things. So that hits on 4, so I can tab to that transient. I can hit enter. Oops, sorry. Command I, sorry about that. I can hit Command I, and I can type in that this is actually 37, measure 37, beat 4. So I'll type in 37, and then I'll select this next little thing here and type in 4. Okay, so that at least gives me some kind of... Oh, beautiful maiden. Okay, so there's my next downbeat. I'm going to tab to transient there. Command I. 39. And let's just listen to that little section because that's a little strange, the way it slows down there. There's a kind of a pause in the music. Oh, beautiful maiden. Good. So that's how you can deal with inconsistent kick drum patterns. You can trigger from the snare too. You can do it on 2s and 4s if you want. And the way I'm scrolling this window, by the way, is I'm holding down the Shift key and using my scroll wheel. And that's how you can scroll manually. Alrighty, that's it. So I'm just going to scroll back through and look at my tempos and see if I made any drastic mistakes, or if they're all somewhere around 66, 65, 67. Great. And that's how you make a tempo map. And if I wanted to get more accurate, you can go back through and say you wanted to, you could put a tempo change every beat if you wanted to, But let's say that I wanted to, one of these snare drums was off, like this one. I could go in and I can tab the transient to that snare drum, identify beat, and just tell it that it's on 10-4 and hit OK. And it'll make even a finer increment. So once you've made your broad strokes, you can go back and get as anal as you want with all this. So now I have a tempo that roughly matches mine. And this is how you make a tempo map for anything you want to do. Okay, so that's that. So we made our tempo map. Next is we're going to set some markers. And we'll just call this beginning here. I'll go back to grid mode. Always in grid mode when you make your markers. Now that you have a tempo track, your markers will snap right to the kick drums, and you'll be able to get around easier. So I'm in grid mode, and I'm going to select measure 10. I hit intro. Listen. Skip it a little bit. Okay, so that's verse 1. Enter. Verse 2. Chorus 1. Try to put markers every 8 bars, so I split the chorus in half. All right, so I'm not sure I got the form right there because that's the hook right there. Let me just listen and see if this verse sounds the same as this verse. Okay, so I think I mislabeled this. This is probably this section. Let's call this a ramp. And a ramp is just a tie-in section before a chorus. And I'll relabel this one too just by double-clicking on it. Then let's call this next section chorus. I'm not sure if he calls it that or not. Yeah, so we'll call this chorus 1B. Next section, enter, break.
Oh, beautiful maiden, glory help patron, wasting all the money on that body that she keeps dating. Her ass and thighs, no, they don't need advice. But the magazine rack keeps saying that her rack's the wrong size.
So as I'm making those markers, that's pretty mundane. So at the same time that I'm making those markers, I'm listening to the track and trying to figure out what I want to do. And I'm just now hearing this song, and I'm just now figuring out what the song is about. So next, let's do our groups. I'm going to go over to the mixer window, and I'll close out this little markers. And did Daniel make it back in? Is the Beat Detective meant to automate this? Yes, Beat Detective, it doesn't work quite that way, but it can. You would have to divide it into kind of blocks. You could do 4 bars at a time, maybe, or 8 bars at a time. And Beat Detective would put a lot more tempo changes in. If we have time, maybe we're not going to have time tonight, but if we have time on the last class, I'll go into Beat Detective a little bit, because Beat Detective is awesome. It does all sorts of great stuff, but it does this type of tempo mapping. You would select maybe this first kick drum, and then the 9th bar you would select the next kick drum and tell it it's 8 bars long, and you can do it automatically with Beat Detective. Yes. Alrighty, so next we have our groups. So I'm going to go back to our mixer window, and you do that by Command equal. And I'm going to take a look and figure out how I want to logically do this. So I'm going to make a bunch of different groups, and I don't have to use them all, but I'm going to have them available. So first I'll make my 2 kick drums as one group. And I select my 2 kick drums, and I hit Command G. And we'll call this kick. And then I'll do the same with my snare drums group. And my toms group. And then I'm going to do all of my drums as another group. Right? And we'll use this for our VCA master. I'm going to hit group, and we'll do a drums group. So I have all my individual drum elements and that. Next is guitars. And this organ, and these are all individuals. Maybe I'll group the background vocals. I don't know if it's really necessary. But we'll make one anyway. Okay, so I have all these groups made. I'm just going to turn them off for right now. And I'm going to make some VCAs next. And we talked about this a while back. So I want my VCAs to be right here before my master fader. So Daniel still didn't make it back. Hope he's okay there. I'm going to select my, let's see, how many do I want? Definitely want a drum group and a guitar group and a background vocal group, because everything else is just individual tracks, so you don't really have to have it in a group. So I'm going to make Command-Shift-N for new tracks, and I'll make 3, and I'll go to VCA masters. And I'm going to label them appropriately. And then I will assign them to the appropriate groups. So my drums are going to go to my drum group, my guitar is going to go to my guitar group, and my background vocals are going to my background group. All right. So next we want to kind of go through and just see what kind of mess we got. This is a live recording. I'm sure there's going to be some problems here somewhere. I don't need all this data at the front of the recording. Oh, I'm sorry. I need to make one more VCA. Let's go back to our mixer, Command equal. I'm going to make one more group, and that's going to be a group of everything. And I'll make one more VCA. Alrighty. So now people arrange these differently. Some people like to keep their drum VCA right next to their drums, which is logical. Put a guitar VCA next to the guitar. And there's really not that many VCAs going on. And then there's one for the background vocals. So if this was a track from an artist, or a track that you had worked on, or a track that someone else had worked on, the first thing that I would do is go through and I would check every crossfade, because you don't want to have bad crossfades and then get to mastering and they brighten up the mastering and all of a sudden there's noises on your track. So first check all of your crossfades. I don't have any, but I'm going to go ahead and delete all this blank data at the beginning. And I did that because my VCA is still enabled. I'm going to turn that off now. Alrighty, so now we have everything organized there. And then I would listen down to the track also, like that Gabriella Anders track I played you the other day. There were a few punches where the instruments got very loud because maybe they were recorded on a different day and then the vocal went back down to normal. So you'd want to straighten out any things that are very obvious. This, again, this is a live recording, so there's probably not going to be so many drastic volume changes unless the engineer had turned up the mic pre during the recording or something like that. So I'm just going to skip that step for right now. And I would check the timing of instruments. I would listen down to the entire track and make sure everything stays in the groove. Make sure there's no train wrecks. And if there were train wrecks, I would try to repair those by editing the audio and shifting things around a little bit. This one's pretty clean. There's a little funky drum moment in there, but I'm just going to leave it in. And then the next thing I would do is I would go through and I want to solo the different tracks and listen to the instruments and see what I'm dealing with here, see what they sound like sonically. And again, if there are any type of problems, I would be able to address it. So what I'm going to do is I want to show you another way to solo things. And so if you go up to your options window and you scroll down, you'll see that there's a solo mode option. And normally it's in this latch mode, which means that you can solo many things at one time, right? You want it to be in solo in place. You don't want it to be AFL or PFL. You want solo in place. And you want to switch this latch mode and switch it to individual, which whenever you solo one thing, if you solo something else, it cancels out. And you can go back and forth on this however you want, but for what I'm going to show you, it's kind of cool. So if I'm listening, if I have my cursor here in the edit window, and I want to listen to this kick drum and nothing is soloed, there's a key command that's really cool. And you can just hold down Shift and hit S. And wherever your cursor is, that's what'll solo. If I jump down to this rack tom track and I put my cursor there and I hit Shift S, the solo will change. So it's very quick to go through and solo different things. I can just click wherever I want and hit this Shift S and be soloing that track. And this is a really quick way to work, and especially when you're trying to find problems, you know. And there's one other command that works in conjunction with that, and that's Shift M mutes a track. So I don't want this chamber, so I could just click on anywhere in the chamber waveform and hit Shift M, and it will mute. Those are really cool, fast commands to use. So what I would do is I would kind of go through this track next, and I would listen for anything that I could clean up. An example of this would be toms. So I have my toms here, and you can see that there's not that many tom hits going on. Right, there's one there, there's a few here and there, blah, blah, blah. This one I'm not sure if it's a tom or not. We can solo that by putting our cursor next to it and hitting Shift S and solo that track. And listen. Yeah, it's a little tom. Okay, so what I would do next is I would turn on my toms group. And now I'm editing both toms at the same time. I'm going to go into slip mode. And I'm going to hit Shift S again. Oops. And that should solo both of them. I'm going to go through and I'm going to quickly clean up these tom tracks. And so my technique for doing this, you can just select up to where you want it to be cleaned and just delete. Or you can use that tab to transient response, and you can tab to the transient and then just hit the B key, separate, and delete. And that's a little tighter. It's more accurate. Now maybe you don't want to be that accurate. Maybe you want to have a little bit of space before it, but that works pretty well in general. Interesting. Okay. So I've got that separated. Now the next one that I want is all the way down here. So I'm going to click on this track down here, and I'm going to tab to transient. I'm going to separate, B. And I'm going to find out how long I want this first tom to ring, and I'm going to put another mark there, or another separation. So I want to keep all of that tom resonance in there. I'll make my waveform a little better so we can see it a little bigger. So I like to edit whenever I can on a transient. So you see that there's a snare drum transient coming up. So I would let that tom ring all the way until this next snare drum here. And let's see if it'll catch it. Yeah. And then I'm going to separate there with just hitting the B key. So now I have this block of unused data. I'm just going to select it and delete. And now those toms are cleaned up. So I would go through and do this to the whole track. So there's my next little transient there. I'm going to hit the B key. Here's Daniel back. Okay. And then I'll go to this next section here. And I'm going to tab over. Find that transient, B. And I like to, most of the time, I choose to not mute toms separately, but mute them as a group so they kind of resonate together. If I have a problem with a tom, then I'll do them separate. So I'm going to go over here. I'm going to B, separate that. And now I can delete all of this. Next. Delete this one.
Hey, Professor.
Yeah, any luck?
No luck. I even tried restarting my computer, which prompted my computer to try and update something, which is why it took me so long.
Oh, no.
And I checked the playback engine and still nothing.
Okay, so how bad are your headphones?
One side doesn't work at all.
Well, maybe that's better
One
than
headphone works.
not
I guess that's better than nothing. But,
than not functioning.
right.
You don't have any little speakers you can hook up to it or anything, right?
I do not.
Okay.
Yeah. It's frustrating. I don't know why it's not working. You'll also have to explain what sample rates are to me sometime, because I don't understand exactly how all that works.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. All right, so I'm in the
By
middle of.
hooking up my Scarlett and one headphone.
Okay, I'm in the middle of cleaning up the tom tracks right now, so I'm basically just deleting anything on the tom tracks that's not a tom.
Got it.
So I've separated that. I'm going to go to this next little tom here. I'm going to separate there. And I'm going to select and delete. I'm using tab to transient to get around here. And the reason I do these edits on a transient, the release of the tom on a transient, is because it masks anything that's unnatural sounding. And once you practice this a little bit, you can do it pretty quickly. So these toms are pretty close together, so I probably wouldn't bother separating those out. Okay, so all of them are separated now. Now I can do a little trick here. I can select all of these regions, and I can hit Command F and bring up my fade dialog box. And I don't want to make crossfades, and I don't want to make fade ins because I've put my my region right there where it should be, my starts right where they should be. But my ends, I'd like a little fade out here. So let's just pick a length. So if you we've talked about this dialog box before, but there's a fade in section, there's a crossfade section, and a fade out section when you have multiple regions like this selected. And so what I'm going to do is you can select whether you actually create these things individually. So I've turned off create new fade in, and I've turned off create crossfades, and I'm just going to turn on fade outs. And let's just make it a short amount just so it's not that'd make an unusual sound. So let's just say, like, I don't know, 30 milliseconds. And what that did was, if you zoom in, you can see there's a little crossfade there. I'm going to make it a little longer. So they're still selected. I can just open that window again, Command F, and I can make this 100 milliseconds, right? And so now all of those regions have been faded for me automatically, and I don't have to do them individually. And that just kind of smooths things out. Let's take a listen to what it sounds like. Right. So that way there's no click or any pop or anything on the fade out. Right, let me turn up my master volume a little bit so we can hear this better. Right? And you want to be careful with tom tracks too. Like, that's a good example right there. Depending on how much cymbal bleed is in that track, you might hear the cymbal clip off, you know, even with all the other tracks going. So just be careful, be aware of that. I don't think it's going to be an issue on this track. If it is an issue, you just extend your fade out. You know, you just make your fade longer. And you could put it at the next transient, something like that.
Hey, Professor.
Yeah.
Sorry. I connected my Scarlett and my headphones, and I'm hearing you through my headphones. And I changed the playback engine on Pro Tools, which prompted the program to restart when you change the playback engine, and I still don't hear anything.
Okay, if you're hearing me, then that means that you have the Scarlett selected up here in this little box here. And so you want to put that on Mac speakers.
So I want to put that on Mac speakers.
Yeah, see, what Pro Tools has a problem sharing the audio driver, and so the computer wants to use the audio driver, and Pro Tools wants to use the audio driver. And if your computer is running at one sample rate and Pro Tools at another, something's got to give. It can't play both at the same time.
All right. So once I change that to MacBook Pro speakers, do I have to do anything else in Pro Tools?
Well, you've already switched your playback engine, so it should be okay. So try it. And if you still can't get it going, you can just share the screen for a second, Daniel, and I can take a look and see if I see something obvious.
Okay, yeah, because I changed that and nothing else. Like I still can't hear anything.
Okay, quit Pro Tools and restart it one time.
Okay.
Don't have to
That'll take a
reboot.
couple minutes.
Yeah, just restart Pro Tools. No, don't reboot.
Right.
Okay, so next I would be going through all these tracks, and I would listen to my material and see if I hear any problems. So let's continue on here. And I'm listening for distortion. Or any sounds that are problematic that I can fix. Ground buzzes. Okay, so check that out. These tracks are labeled backwards. The high tom should be here. So let's fix that. This is rack. And if you can have two tracks named the same, so I changed it to rack tom. So I'll go to the next one, change this to floor tom. Right. Then we can take a listen here. And let's hear overheads.
But that hurt.
So now I'm listening to which side the hi-hat is panned on. So this hi-hat is panned audience perspective. So I'm going to keep that in mind, and I'm going to pan my toms to match. So that means the floor tom is going to go opposite the hi-hat, and the rack tom is going to go on the same side as the hi-hat. I'm sorry, Daniel. What about take a track, just take one of your tracks, like your bass drum track, and select your output and see if you can change that to something else. Maybe you've got something confused there.
Right now it's output to mix stereo, not MacBook Pro speakers.
Okay, change to MacBook Pro speakers. See if you have
Yep,
sound.
now I can hear it.
Yay! Excellent.
I'm
Okay,
not sure how or why that happened.
that's this I/O setup box here. And so
Does
what
IO stand for in, out?
input output, correct.
Okay.
And so what that's showing you, Daniel, is it's showing you this mix is what my tracks are going out of. That's the bus. And then you can assign any bus to any output. So you should have been able to just assign that mix to your Mac internal speakers right here on the side. That's what I was showing you earlier.
Okay. Yeah, it's hard to do all on one device.
Yeah, I get it. Yeah, I get it. Believe me, when I was trying to do this on my laptop, I bought this computer before this class, luckily, because I tried to set all this up on my laptop, and it was a nightmare to try to get Zoom and all this going.
Right. So when my mapping output, it has output 1, 2, and mix in the bus column.
You're over in the I/O setup now?
Yes, IO setup in the bus tab.
Right.
I have the name on the left. I have MacBook Pro speakers 1, 2, mix, and then buses. And on the right, I just have output 1, 2, and then mix path.
Okay, so
/N.
that's what you want to change is this one that says mix. You want to change that to Mac internal or whatever your speakers are called.
Change the name of it.
No, just click on it and you should be able to select. You'll get this little pop-up menu like this.
Is it a secondary click?
No, just click where it says mapped to output, mapping to output.
It is not showing me.
Okay, well, you have it working now, so let's just fix your whole session. Close out of this window.
Okay.
And then go to your track, one of your tracks, hold down the Option key, and then select your Mac internal speaker, whatever it's called, and then that should make that output go to all the tracks.
Okay, got it.
You got it? Is it working?
Let's
hear audio. See if you hear audio.
Yes. Yep.
Great.
I can hear it.
Perfect. Yay. Fantastic.
Oh, so many tiny one little thing that can screw up everything.
Yeah, I know. There's a lot going on. But this I/O window is it's a crucial one. That's the reason I've spent a lot of time on it. We can go back over it some more sometime too if you want. Alrighty, so we're listening down to tracks to see what problems we have. We've cleaned up the drum tracks. We've found that our toms were mispatched. And we've listened to the overheads a little bit, and we discovered that the hi-hat is on the right. So that means it's right, it's on the right. So that means it's audience perspective for the drums. Now let's see if we can hear it on the room. Yeah, so the ride is on the left. So those are both panned the same. And so we went over and we adjusted our toms to match. I just panned them wide for right now, but we probably won't leave them wide. And then we can do the same. There is no hi-hat track, but if there was a hi-hat track, we would pan the hi-hat slightly over to the right also. And so all of our drums are the same perspective. So let's take a listen to this room track. Yeah, room sounds pretty good, actually. That's nice to know. Continuing on, let's listen to the bass. Now, this is a keyboard bass he's playing. And as I'm listening to these, I'm visually looking at these waveforms and seeing if there's anything that looks unusual, any notes that jump way out, or if there's anything that looks clipped off or strange. And this looks pretty even. And I've skipped this chamber track. We can hear a little bit of that too. So I'm not sure where this chamber is coming from. I don't know if they actually have a chamber in this studio. This is, I believe, Telefunken, the microphone manufacturer, has this studio, and they do all these artists that come in. And so I'm just going to turn that off for a minute. Let's continue listening here. We have two guitar mics, it looks like, on the same cabinet. So yeah, so that's a darker mic there. And this has got our pick sound to it. So we will make a choice when we start mixing this. Do I want to maybe spread these tracks a little bit wide and have kind of a dark sound on one side and a bright sound on the other? Let's start with that. I'm going to put the dark side over on the right and the bright side on the left. And just for something to get started to listen to. And next we have an organ. I'll look down the waveform, see where it gets loud. This organ is actually a Rhodes. So I'm not sure if any organ comes in somewhere. No, so we'll retitle this Rhodes. And so that looks pretty clean from beginning to end. And next we have our lead vocal. So you have to be careful. If you want to clean up the lead vocal, we can. But as you listen to that lead vocal, these guys are all in one room. And so if you start messing with the lead vocal and cutting out areas where he's not singing, you might really hear that during the mix. This is kind of like mixing live sound a little bit because everybody's in one area. So I'm not going to edit the lead vocal. We can take a listen to the backgrounds and see if we could edit them possibly.
Coffee and a cigarette, color and nude.
So these I think I'm gonna edit.
Doll it up for disrespect, disrespect, disrespect. Popping pills and posting pics, stressing on your waist and hips. Your body's right, the world is sick, world is sick, world is sick. Flower, flower.
Because those are pretty clean, so I think I can cut out some of this noise in between. Anything you can do to clean up the tracks is just going to make your mix less cloudy. So we'll get rid of that stuff.
Coffee and a cigarette. Way there. Naturally. Naturally.
Okay, let's make sure I didn't cut anything off on this first one.
Flower. Good to me. You're just the way that.
I'm just going to leave that in. Okay, and then maybe we'll clean up the ending some here.
Naturally. 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 Naturally.
Okay, so just do a little crossfade there. Clean up wherever I can. And let's take a look at these now and fade them down and make sure they're nice and clean. In order to get back and forth through these regions, if you turn off tab to transient up here, and you just use the shift key, the tab key, you can either go forward with tab or option tab goes backwards. And so you can kind of bounce through these quickly. So I'll put a little fade in here. Hit the F key for a fade. I'm going to tab to the end of the region. Select that. Hit the F key for a fade. And then here's the next one. I'm tabbing to get to the next ones. Hit the F key. Tab again to get to the end. Fade. Great. So all the background vocals are cleaned up now. So my tracks are about as clean as I can get them to start with. So let's see what's next on our track list here. Mute sections of the track solo and mute, we talked about that, the Shift S and Shift M. So we're going to check polarity of the drums, especially, because drums generally have something that's flipped. And the way I do this is I start with the bass drum first, and I'll listen to one bass drum. I'll go ahead and I'll make a trim plug-in here so I can change the polarity. And I'll solo both of these bass drums. All right, so those are in phase with each other. I'm going to just zoom into the waveform and take a look at it too, and we can see that both bass drums are going up and down at the same time. There's a little bit of time difference because one mic is a little bit further away than the other, but you see the waveforms go up first. And while we're here, let's just take a look at a snare hit. I'm going to go back to tab to transient, and I'm going to go to a snare hit. And this probably won't be as easy to see. Yeah, but generally the waveforms going up together. We can play around and see if the phase, see which way polarity sounds best. So kick drum's okay. Let's go to snare. So the one with more bottom is usually the one that's correct. So that sounds thinner. So the polarity of the snare drum is fine too. And next, generally what I do is I jump to the overheads and I'll check the snare drum with the overheads. And I'm just going to shift and solo both of those together and see how that sounds. Okay, so that means probably either the overheads are out of phase or the snare drum is out of phase or out of polarity. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to check this against the kick drum now. So I'll listen to kick and I'll listen to overheads together. It's pretty close. I think that the overheads are out of, need to have the polarity reversed. So I just reversed it on the overheads. And then next I'll check the room mics. Solo kick and room. Or I could do snare and room. But we know that the kick and snare are in the same. Not sure about the room. I think that maybe we'll leave both of these reversed and we'll see how it goes later. Okay, so there's my polarity. There's really nothing else unless the two guitars happen to be out of phase, but we can just take a look at these waveforms and see. No, they are right in phase with each other, so that's good. So in order to get those mics in phase, when you put the guitar mics on the cabinet, you can put the capsules right next to each other if you're trying two different mics like this. And just if the capsules are the same distance, then it's going to be, the polarity is going to be okay. And that's basically it for polarity. So that's off our list. And next we're going to just take a listen down and we're going to look at the individual tracks and see where our peaks are sitting on the drum tracks. So it looks like maybe the bass drum is just a little bit hot, but it's okay. It's not clipping. So at this point I have a choice. I'm seeing that all of these drums are pretty loud. They're all clipping at above above -6. So my choice is I can turn these clip gain down on all of the drum tracks uniformly, or I can just pull the faders down a little bit when I mix because it's not really hitting at such a loud level that it's problematic. So I can either be balancing before all of this stuff or after. So let's just leave them for right now, and I'm just going to in the back of my mind know that eventually I'm going to have to turn down the drums a little bit. And it's very easy to do because I have a little drum VCA here. So let's take a look at the bass. Okay, so all the levels look fine. I don't see anything that's extravagant. I don't see anything that's loud. I don't see anything that's way out of whack. So let's move down our list here. We don't really have any master fader. We did the master fader. Rough balancing. So just at this point, this is where we bring all the faders up to 0 and see what's too loud. And that's where I have it now. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm just going to mute the vocals for a second. And let's listen to what the band's doing. So whoever recorded this did a pretty good job because all the faders are at 0 and the band sounds fairly balanced there. But if we look at our master fader here, we can see that we're already almost all the way at the top there. And that's before we put in vocals. So I'm going to grab this master VCA and I'm going to pull it down some. Didn't assign it yet. Because we want to have room for the vocals to sit on top of this mix. I'm just going to pull it down right now. I've brought it down about 5 dB. And I'm going to put the vocals in now. Let's go to a verse. So now I have room to turn the vocal up.
Even from a mirror, but that her dukes are not the daisies.
And what I like to think about when I'm mixing stuff is kind of baby steps, right? So we get the band just roughly balanced, and then we put the vocals in and get them roughly balanced, and you just start massaging it. If you just concentrate on one thing too early on, a lot of times you'll dig yourself in a hole. So I like to kind of get the band balanced and see where I'm at. And I'll mix different songs in different ways. If it's a song that's all about the vocal and the drums and bass are just kind of there, supporting, maybe I don't mix the drums first. Most people mix the drums first, but it depends on the song, and I try to follow what the music dictates. This has got a groove to it, so there's nothing wrong with working on the drums first. But I want to get the vocals in there and get them just roughed in. I'm going to go ahead and just put all these faders back at 0 for right now and see how we're doing with the vocal balance.
Beautiful lady, baby, baby. Even from a mirror, but that her dukes are not the daisies and coffee and cigarettes.
Okay, so those cymbal hits are loud and they're annoying me. So I'm just gonna bring down the cymbals in the rooms for a few minutes, and just so I can concentrate on what's going on with the vocal. And I know by listening to these tracks that there's a lot of bleed, and there's actually a lot of cymbals in the actual lead vocal mic. So we'll have to massage that a little bit to get those cymbals to settle down some.
Coffee and cigarettes, calorie news.
So I need to balance these backgrounds a little bit.
Disrespect, disrespect,
Turn up the lead a little more.
popping pills and posting pics.
And I'm going to turn down the female vocal a little bit using clip gain.
Body's right, the world is sick, world is sick, world is sick from flower to flower.
So the quick way to use clip gain is you select all the regions you want to turn down, and you hold down Control and Shift. And then you can use your scroll wheel to bring the level up and down, right? And you can also, if you don't have a scroll wheel, you can also use the up and down arrows, and you hold down those same keys, Control and Shift, and then up and down arrows can quickly turn your regions up and down for you.
Coffee, cigarettes, calorie news around the neck. Don't let up. Disrespect, disrespect, disrespect. Popping pills and posting pics, stressing all.
Baby steps, right? We don't have any compression on them. We just want them roughed in for right now. And we want to see, now let's take a look at our master meter and see where our basic level is sitting.
Coffee, cigarettes, calorie news.
And if we need to adjust it up or down, we have our master VCA right here. I can turn things wherever I want them. So I'm looking at my master meter here, trying to keep my peaks at around -6 or something like that on the loud sections.
World is sick from flower growing free.
Okay, that's a pretty good level.
Oh, no, pedals, they look
All right, so we kind of figured out our panning already. There was not much complicated going on with the panning. I could choose to pan the vocals a little bit out, so they're not right in the center, maybe a girl on one side and the guy on another or something like that. But I'm just going to leave them in the center for right now because it's kind of important that they blend. Alrighty, we're making our way through here. Next is EQ correction and compression. Okay, so there's a phenomenon that happens when you're mixing instruments together, and it's called masking. And masking is when instruments have the same frequency range and they kind of cancel each other out. So if I don't think I did this demo for you guys, but I can do a demo where I can take a sine wave, 2 sine waves, and I can make them almost exactly the same pitch, just a little bit different. And whichever one is louder, you're going to hear, and whichever one is softer, you're not going to hear because they're in the same frequency range. And that's called masking, this cloudiness of certain frequencies. And it happens a lot, and there's usually a lot of information between like 150 hertz and 400 hertz and that kind of area. There's all of this buildup that happens in the low mid, and it makes your tracks sound muddy. And so we want to try to figure out where the masking problems are coming from and clean up those areas. For example, if you have a lot of low end on a guitar, and that guitar is in that low end is in the same frequency area as the bass, you have to make a decision. You know, if it's a metal track, maybe you want that low end on the guitar, but if it's a track like this, maybe you want to suck a little low end out of the guitar so the bass has more room, you know. Or the same with the bass and the kick drum. And the same with the low end of the vocals. Right now there's a lot of kind of boxy sound in the vocals if we solo them up here.
Coffee and cigarettes, calorie news.
around the neck. Don't
Lit up for disrespect,
disrespect.
disrespect.
So those backgrounds have a lot of woofy wooliness in there. And if you put those in with the
Coffee and the cigarettes, calorie
the low end of the
news
voice
around your neck.
is competing with the bass.
Lit up for
And if you add the
disrespect,
Rhodes to that,
disrespect, disrespect. Popping pills and posting pics.
you don't have clarity in the vocals
Wasting hips.
because the other instruments are eating up that low frequency information. So you want to make decisions when you're mixing on how to clean up cloudiness. If you have, and the same thing happens on the top end. If you have a guitar, like an acoustic guitar that's strumming and it's got a lot of high frequency information, or maybe you have a percussion instruments like triangles and shakers, and they're conflicting with the voice, you're going to lose your brightness from the voice because you're going to be focused on these sparkly instruments up there. So you have to make decisions, and you have to kind of mix in layers. So you're building things not only as far as volume and as far as pan, but also as far as frequencies, so these things don't conflict so much with each other. The best way to deal with this is with your orchestrations. You try not to put instruments in the same register, and try to cut that off before it even happens. With a little jazzy group like this, you're going to have guitars and Rhodes playing in the same register. But if you have an orchestra, if you have a bigger ensemble, you can make decisions about your EQ versus the voicing versus the instrument and the pitch register of the instruments. So what I would probably suggest first is I really want to listen to these vocals, and let's see what's going on with like the male vocal here and see how we want to filter it. What I'm going to do to get us started is I'm going to come down. This first slot up here has my trims in it. Right? So I'm going to come down to the second slot, and I'm going to hold down the Option key, and I'm just going to insert an EQ across every channel by holding down the Option key, and I'll go to EQ 3 7-band, which is our plugin we have. And that'll put an EQ that's just flat across everything. So let's take a listen to his voice first.
Coffee and cigarettes, calorie news around the neck. Don't it up, disrespect, disrespect, disrespect. Popping pills.
So what I hear, first of all, is there's a lot of drum bleed in that mic. And I don't need a lot of that low information in his voice. I still want him to have a fullness to his voice, but I don't need so much of that. So the first thing I'm going to grab is I'm going to grab my high pass filter, and I'm going to turn it on. And I'm going to probably kick this up. And I'm just going to push this up to maybe 100 hertz, something like that. And as I do that, you'll hear some of that roomy trash from the drums start to clean up. I'll just push it up too far, and you can listen as I do.
Coffee and cigarettes, calorie news around.
Now this is too far for the voice, but you hear what's happening to the bleed underneath him.
Disrespect, disrespect. Popping pills.
Hear all that kick drum information? I don't need that in his vocal track.
Body's right, the world is sick, world is sick, world is sick.
So I'm at about 160 right now, and that's probably a good starting point. And the other reason that you don't want you want to minimize the drums in his vocal as much as possible is because eventually I'm going to put some reverb and delay on this, and I would rather his voice or the kick drum not have a lot of reverb on it from his vocal mic.
Coffee and cigarettes.
So I would naturally want to brighten his voice just a little bit because it seems a little dark and a little shadowed. So I'm going to just add a little shelf on the top.
Cigarettes, calorie news around the neck. Don't it up.
And that's going to let it cut through the track a little bit.
Disrespect, disrespect. Popping pills and posting pics.
I'll try to open this up a little bit and see what happens.
Body's right, the world is sick, world is sick.
Because I want to get the bottom in his voice too.
Flower, flower, growing.
this point, I'm going to put it back in the track and listen.
Oh, no, petals, they look good to me. And you're just the way that you move should be. Yet you're beautiful naturally.
So baby steps. So that's clean enough for right now. I hear some problems in this same kind of 400 area, just in the tone of his voice. But I'm just trying to clean up as acoustically as much as I can right now and get the tracks stabilized some. So let's listen to the female vocal. Yep, go ahead.
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
So when you say you hear a problem in that certain frequency range, what do you mean by that? Like, what are you hearing?
I'm
I
hearing
have
it.
a hard time a lot when you say I'm hearing this or that for me to hear what you're hearing.
Right. I'm just saying that I'm going to readdress this a little more later, and I'll kind of explain what I'm hearing. I'm hearing a honkiness in the voice a little bit right now, a kind of ha, ha, ha type of frequency that's probably going to be around 400, I'm assuming. But that's just because I've listened to a million vocal tracks. So that's the reason right now I'm just doing the basic thing of cleaning up and taking the low-end information out of those tracks and adding a little bit of high shelf on top, just because I know I'm going to want it to cut through a little bit.
Gotcha.
All right. So I'm going to move to the female vocal now and do the same type of thing.
Coffee and a cigarette.
So her mic is a lot cleaner.
Surround your
It's not
neck.
all that bleed in there, so she wasn't right in front of the drums like him.
Disrespect, disrespect, disrespect.
Okay, you hear her voice, her P's are popping. Disrespect. And that's because she's very close to the microphone, so she has a lot of proximity effect going on. So I'm going to address that by the same type of technique that I did with his vocal, where I'm just going to pull some bottom out using a high-pass filter.
Coffee and a cigarette. Color and noose around your neck. Doll it up for disrespect.
That's better.
Disrespect, 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 disrespect.
Yeah, it cleans it up some. And then I'm probably going to add a little top on her just to give her a little air. And so with vocals, you have to make choices too. If you want to have a big, warm sounding voice, you're going to have to push it pretty far forward in the mix so it can cut through the other instruments. If you want to place the vocal back a little bit in the mix, then you can add a little bit of air on the top, and that enables you to hear the consonants and vowels better. You know, you're hearing the enunciation better. So I'm just adding a little bit of air up here, and it's somewhere, I don't know, 6K. It's a shelf, so it's everything above like 6 or 7K, it looks like. And that's just kind of a starting point.
Disrespect, disrespect.
And so now let's listen to the male voice.
And cigarettes, calorie noose around your neck, doll it up for disrespect.
Same problem. So I'm actually just going to copy her EQ. And I'll show you a quick way to copy and paste plug-in EQs. So this is Command-Shift-C is copy. And Command-Shift-V is paste. So you can do that with any plugins that you want to copy from one to the other. We're running out of time. Shoot, we're not there yet. Okay, we're going to have to continue this more next week, but man, I wanted to get through a little more of this. Let's see. Any on your projects that are due next week, are you guys having any particular questions that you want to address? The things that I still have to go over, I'm going to be compressing and I'm going to be EQing these things. But I'm also going to be adding some effects, and I want to get into automation some. So Anybody have any questions on that? What area would you like for me guys to go into now? Because we're running short on time here. I didn't realize it was quite so late.
I have a quick question about the deadline. Is it due the 13th, or do you want us to use the information from the class? When is it due again?
No, it's due on the 13th because I have to have the grades turned in.
That's what I thought, but then you said like for next class we were going to talk about other stuff, but that's just for us to know, I guess.
Yeah, it's just continue with the information, you know.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
I can show you quickly. What would you like to? Compression. I think we've spent a lot of time on today, and you know, what I would do with these vocals, for example, is I would put a little bit of compression, especially on the male vocal, and so I would add a compressor. Dyne compressor.
The cigarettes, calorie news around the neck. Don't it up with disrespect, disrespect, disrespect.
And that'll pull the vocal back in, and keep those loud notes from jumping out so much. And then what I would do is I would add a little gain on top of that too, makeup gain, so that my input and outputs are the same.
The cigarettes, calorie news around the neck. Don't it up with disrespect, disrespect, disrespect.
It's fairly natural sounding. So I would do that probably to all three vocals. Some kind of compression like that. I'm just roughing it in here. Let's listen to all three of them.
The cigarettes, calorie news around the neck. Don't it up for disrespect, disrespect, disrespect. Popping pills and posting pics, stressing on.
Okay, the Rhodes is a little bit loud. I would pull the Rhodes down some.
The cigarettes, calorie news around the neck. Don't it up for disrespect, disrespect, disrespect. Popping pills and posting.
And she doesn't need to be as loud as the lead.
Stressing on the waist and hips. Her body's right. The world is sick. World is sick. World is sick from flower to flower, growing free. Oh, your petals, they look.
And then I would probably go through my next step would be going through the instruments and trying to clean this up a little bit too. I would go through the drums and I would filter the drums some to try to take some of the muddiness out of them. Let's use cymbals, for example. Those are actually fairly clean. Yeah, the guy did a pretty good job recording this. Yeah, it's pretty clean. So my next step would be I would go through and I would EQ the drums and I would make them pleasant sounding to my taste, and I would add some compression to them so that they have a glue to them. So the mix kind of wants to sit flat. And when you're first starting to work with compression, try not to use it too heavily. Try not to hit it too hard. 3 dB, 4 dB of compression. Don't hit unless you have a real problem, like I was talking about a bass guitar earlier. Unless you have a real problem like that, don't pump the compressor too hard, especially on things like drums. Just hit it lightly. And then with drums, you would want to take your compression and you want to do exactly what that guy was talking about in the video. And you'll take your compressor and you will back the attack time slower and decide how much of that transient you want to come through to make the instrument fit your groove or your track. Where's the plug-in Dyne 3? So this is on the kick drum. Just turn it up for a second. So if I turn the attack all the way down, it takes away all the punch. If I turn it up faster, hear how the weight of the kick drum comes back through now? So these are the decisions you have to make with your attack. How much of that do you want to come through? There's a couple of different kick drum tracks here. This one has got the bright attack, and then this is more of the low end. And so you can balance these two. So you have some low end and you have some attack. And then on the drums, I would be doing a lot of EQing, but we're trying to start with these baby step techniques here. Next, I would add some effects, because once you start adding reverbs, you're going to change everything. The reverb is going to add some denseness to the sound, and I would filter the reverbs. I would take out some low end on the reverbs, especially on that reverb that you have, I forgot what's deverb, because it's kind of already got a bassy type of sound to it. So, gosh, guys, I'm sorry that that this is taking longer. We had a couple of stumbling blocks tonight. If you want to wait until, gosh, I don't have that much time to turn stuff in. If you want to wait an extra day, I can give you maybe until, if you want to turn them in on Tuesday or Wednesday at the latest. I think I can still make the grade turn-in deadline, so we can go through some more of this mixing stuff next week, because I'd really like for you guys to get some more of this information. Is that all right with you guys? And if you want to go ahead and turn it in, if you're comfortable, go ahead and turn it in. It's no problem. I know you've got a lot going on with the class. All righty. Any questions, guys?
Yes, Professor, that sounds good.
Okay.
Tuesday or Wednesday at the latest sounds perfectly fine.
Yeah, I think that would give you a chance for me to get a little deeper into mixing. I mean, frankly, the main part is you guys being able to use Pro Tools, and these mixing techniques is just kind of a perk. It's kind of a little bonus here. But I would like for you guys to have this information in some way, All right? So let's call it tonight. My God, we've almost been here for 3 hours. So let's go ahead and call it. And you guys have a good evening, and I'll see you next Monday.